Jacob loved the Marine Corps from his very first days at the boot camp. The training camp at Perris Island weeded out the recruits with the relentless brutality of the military elite. Severe trials, excruciating drills, and fire training turned yesterday's civilians into professional Army men. Someone got through the vigorous training, while others gave up just a few days in. Jacob Martinez was among the first group, and the drill sergeant quickly noticed him amid the new recruits. The young man came from a small town in Ohio and showed incredible agility and endurance, characteristic of only the best fighters. Ever since childhood, Jacob dreamed of joining the ranks of the Marine Corps, and going through the history textbooks, admired the stories of courage that this branch of the military was famous for. At the time of the contract signing, Jacob was in a relationship with Maggie Simpson, who he had known since school. They had been dating for over 2 years and were making plans for a future together. But first, Jacob wanted to become a professional soldier like his late father, who died a heroic death during a special operation in one of the countries of the Middle East. Of course, Maggie tried to dissuade her boyfriend from such a serious step, but he was adamant, since he literally dreamed of joining the Marine Corps. "Will you wait for me, honey? I will serve in the Army, get the military specialty, and return to civilian life, okay?" Jacob asked, hugging his girlfriend before leaving for the training camp. "Yes, dear, don't worry about me. Of course I'll wait for you," Maggie assured her fiancé. That night, the young people didn't go to sleep until the very next morning and promised each other that they would get through all the difficulties together and would certainly get married when Jacob gets back. The next day, Jacob arrived at the location of the Army unit. Like hundreds of other recruits, he put on his military uniform and started training. Of course, serving in the Marine Corps wasn't easy. After all, there was a good reason why it was considered to be the elite military branch in the country. Back in the early days of his training, Jacob became friends with a man from a nearby town named Floyd Robinson. United by common hardships and tough drills, the young soldiers felt like they were real brothers just 1 month into training, and they were ready to help and support each other like real siblings. Unlike his new friend, Floyd was more experienced in matters of the heart. He had been in a serious relationship and had gone through a painful breakup. It was Floyd who first asked Jacob in one of their conversations whether he was sure whether his fiancée was cheating on him. "You have to understand, waiting 2 or 3 years for the soldier to come back from the Army isn't for every woman. That's why I broke up with my girlfriend before signing the contract." Floyd once shared his thoughts when they were having dinner at the canteen. "But Maggie and I love each other, man. Why ruin the relationship with distrust?" Jacob replied doubtfully. But Floyd just shook his head and, refusing to comment further, left his friend alone with his thoughts. Despite the fact that Jacob didn't really take Floyd's words seriously, a spark of distrust still crept into his soul. The saddest part was that it wasn't groundless or unjustified. Maggie had been acting very strange recently. She became sullen and constrained during their phone conversations, which upset the lovesick soldier. Moreover, Maggie virtually stopped writing him letters and overall kept their communications to a minimum. "Well, what did I tell you? And you didn't believe me. Take my word for it. Most women don't like waiting. Such is the fate of a Marine." Floyd expressed his opinion. "But we're engaged. We promised to marry each other," Jacob exclaimed in despair, realizing how ridiculous his words sounded in the situation. Tired of looking at his friend's torment, Floyd advised him to put on an act for his fiancée to test her loyalty. Jacob was skeptical about his suggestion at first, but then he decided to take the chance and try it. If only the young Marine could have known how close his friend was to the truth. During the time that Jacob was going through the basic training at the Perris Island training camp, Maggie was leading a busy life full of entertainment. The woman was going to nightclubs, movie premieres, and student parties. Eventually, Maggie met a young man at one of those events. He was into motorcycles and everything to do with them. Bill immediately turned the woman's head with stories about long trips and biker clubs, which have always been associated with the romance of life on the road and the pungent smell of gasoline. Unbeknownst to herself, Maggie got infatuated with the young biker, and for a moment even forgot about Jacob, who still loved her and was waiting for her letters. Feeling that something was wrong, the young Marine decided to take the advice of his friend and arrange a kind of test for his fiancée. One evening, Jacob called Maggie from the phone at the checkpoint and told her the sad news. "Hello, dear. Please don't worry. There was an accident. Our helicopter crashed during the training landing, and a fire broke out. Then there was an explosion. Unfortunately, I ended up losing both of my legs." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean you lost your legs? Are you disabled now?" Maggie exclaimed, bursting into tears. Jacob took a short pause, trying to get a hold of himself, and then continued. "I'm sorry, Maggie. You won't leave me now, will you?" But the woman was sobbing loudly, and instead of answering her fiancé's question, hung up the phone. Jacob was devastated. The young Marine felt that his test ended up being too cruel and simply appalling. But Floyd persuaded him to wait and see what would happen next. 3 days later, Maggie called Jacob, acting as if nothing had happened. She informed her fiancé that she'd met another man. "What other man? How could you? Why?" Jacob said in a trembling voice. "I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm still young. I don't want to spend the rest of my life with a disabled person. I'm sorry, but we're done. Goodbye, Jacob," he replied. Jacob had a hard time remembering what happened next. Devastated over his ex-fiancé's betrayal, the young Marine ran to the armory, planning on committing suicide. Fortunately, Floyd noticed him in time. He stopped Jacob and pulled him into the back room. "Calm down and listen to me. Trust me, you're not the first person going through this. Can you finally take off your rose-colored glasses and understand that this is what a soldier's fate is?" Floyd exclaimed, grabbing his friend by the shoulders. He understood what his friend was going through, since he knew that Jacob sincerely believed that Maggie was his soulmate and that they would always be together. It took Jacob a while to get over the breakup and finally be able to focus all of his energy on his military service. During this time, the young Marine took part in several military operations in one of the eastern countries. By honorably fulfilling his duty, Jacob had proven himself as a great soldier. He definitely earned his right to proudly call himself a Marine. During one of the combat missions, the young man got injured and was sent to a military hospital, where he was taken to an urgent surgery. Jacob received the Purple Heart Medal for his bravery on the battlefield, glorifying the Marine Corps once again. When his contract ended, the young man was discharged from the military, and together with Floyd Robinson, he returned to civilian life. Back during his treatment at the hospital, Jacob met a pretty nurse who wanted to help the young man get back on his feet so much that she never left his side. The young woman's name was Jennifer, and all the women in her family worked as nurses. Chatting about everything in the world, the Marine and the nurse quickly fell into a growing mutual attraction. By the time Jacob was released from the hospital, they already considered themselves a couple. 6 months later, the young people held a small wedding ceremony, which only a few of their closest friends attended. Floyd was one of the guests. After serving in the Marine Corps, he decided to go into business. However, he needed a reliable partner to go into business with him, and Jacob was just the right person for that. They quickly put together a construction company and began to take contracts from any kind of repair work. There were very few orders at first, but then things quickly went uphill. In just 2 years, the company staff has almost tripled, which made the former Marines millionaires. Several years passed. Jacob never once saw Maggie in all that time. But then, one day, as he was going through the park on his way home, Jacob saw a woman pushing a wheelchair in front of her. A boy of about 7 years was sitting in it. The young businessman stopped and carefully looked at the stranger's face. And when their eyes met, Jacob exclaimed, "Maggie, is that really you? I thought you got married and moved to another city." It really was Maggie. The woman lowered her eyes in embarrassment and answered, "Yes, it's me, as you can see. I'm glad to see that you can still walk. As for Bill, we've been divorced for 3 years now, ever since he was in a car crash with our son. He didn't get a single scratch, but Kevin's spine was damaged. Instead of helping, Bill left me and our sick son. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly felt very sorry for his ex-fiancée, who betrayed him 8 years ago. Of course, he didn't love Maggie anymore, but the boy wasn't to blame for anything. Even though Kevin wasn't his son, Jacob decided to help anyway. Is there anything that can help your son? Maybe a surgery he could get, or some treatment? The businessman asked, hopefully. Maggie sighed sadly in response and shook her head. There actually is a surgery that can help, but I don't have the money for it. Kevin's treatment is very expensive, and we're living off of benefits as it is. Smiling mysteriously, Jacob leaned over and asked Kevin, "Who would you like to become if you could walk again?" The boy's eyes sparkled with joy. "I dream of becoming a pilot, sir," Kevin replied. Jacob shook the boy's hand and promised to help. After parting with Maggie, the young businessman didn't feel any pain or bitterness. He stopped loving her a long time ago, and all Jacob wanted to do now was help little Kevin. A week later, Maggie got a strange letter with the picture of an airplane on the envelope. Having opened it, she found a check for an impressive amount for the boy's surgery. There was also a small note in the envelope that read, "I hope your dream comes true, little pilot." The letter had no return address, but Maggie knew who sent it. Pressing it to her chest, the woman said a mental thank you to Jacob for his help and kindness. There was a beautiful life ahead of Kevin, full of interesting events and achievements. But he never saw Jacob again, even though he was forever grateful to the kind man whom he considered to be a real-life Wizard of Oz.